Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I have a very special guest, Curt Doolittle of the Proprietary Institute. Today we're going to talk about civilizations, and unfortunately, I cannot give out the same eloquent introduction as JF did last week.
Yeah. You don't need to. Thanks.
One thing to note that ever since you started your philosophy or constructing your philosophy, you put a very strong emphasis on West and its uniqueness and its evolutionary strategy. As Ricardo, I cannot say his last name,
Duchesne.
Duchesne categorizes it as aristocratic egalitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
As the European strategy or the Indo-European strategy. You want?
I would say it's a European strategy. I think the Indus and Iranian branches relatively rapidly abandon it. Whether the conflict is because between some people, so it'd be Kieran Armstrong and myself and a few, and probably maybe I don't know. I'd have to ask him, but I would say there's those of us who think that the West developed it, and the other branches reacted to it. In other words, the Iranians and the Indian, eventually the Indian branches reacted to it, and there's the opposite position that these groups were distributing the same original message. They just modified it very, very rapidly upon expansion. I'm not sure which is right. So, I tend to just say at present it's a European.
European strategy. I've been reading lately famous economist Thomas Sowell, and one of his more recent books, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. He noted specifically in Germany that they did place a very strong that in Germany specifically they have they produce Roman generals. They have a particular tendency to craftsmanship, artisans, things. Moreover, on the West specifically, I think the West is definitely unique due to its geographic situation and also whoever put them on this path to this evolutionary group strategy as termed aristocratic egalitarianism I think it really gave a lot of never before seen prosperity and rather advancement in science compared to other civilization that seem to be rather stagnating, or comparatively stagnating in
I would say that if you took the position that Europeans invented, or excuse me, Indo-Europeans invented what we think of aristocracy, wheel, chariot, horse, bronze, and the ability to rule a territory rather than just a band or a city. If you took that position, I think that you could view the rest of human history as a counter-revolution against it. Now, that's might be an over-exaggeration, but it will help position the Western civilization's group strategy as very different from everyone else's. Starting with very first principles, not the least of which is that we telling the truth regardless of its impact on the dominance hierarchy, or as other people would prefer to call it, the competence hierarchy. I'm going to stick with dominance.
Gotta be that manly man, right?
Well, I don't know what competence means, but I know what the ability to dominate means. So, or to impose your will means. So, whatever that means, that's an incredibly unnatural thing for a species to do, any one of them. Um, we evolved to negotiate with one another. That's why truth isn't necessarily something we're a lot more comfortable with what we call emotional truth than we are with honesty and the intellectual truth and testimony, which is sanitized testimony. We're a lot more comfortable down in this negotiating space, and if we wouldn't need this whole discipline of truth and testimony and law, or even education, if truth came naturally to us. What comes naturally to us is negotiation, pragmatism. Truth doesn't come very naturally to us. That's why we have to work so hard at it. And so it's very unnatural for a people to choose truth, testimonial truth. Now, every other culture will argue back and forth that they tell the truth, and it's absolutely not true. They have some variation on the truth and a lot of contextual gimmies, but the reason for the West's success is primarily this one set of virtues, which is we chose truth, sovereignty, and reciprocity. And once you've made those choices, that's your destiny. I think what you want to get at by interpret your suggestions or your questions so far is that we had a period called the axial age, which is when everybody sort of reacted to this evolution of paternalism, and everybody froze their group evolutionary strategy at that particular time and just habituated it over the generations. This includes all sorts of consequences, and I think that's the subject that helps us understand understanding why those groups chose those strategies and when they froze and what those strategies consist of. That helps us really clearly understand the difference between civilizations.
Yeah. Moreover, you think
I'm losing you here. I got a little.
Am I echoing?
No, you weren't echoing. I just lost you for a second there.
Okay. Moreover, you think ignoring the West for a moment, let's focus on more on the Eastern Europe and Russia, the Orthodox situation, civilization. It seemed like they're definitely a much lower. They're definitely a much lower trust polity, and have a tendency to practice discretionary rule and outright totalitarianism. Yeah. So can you explain why their evolutionary strategy, the Slavic people head down that path, unlike their Western?
I don't think it's the Slavic people. I think we have to separate the Russians from the northern, the northeastern Slav, the Russians, the northern Slavs, which is the people around the North Sea, the Poles and those guys, and then we have to separate the southern Slavs, who are Slavic speakers, but they're actually old Europeans. I think I need to get Simon Strom on here to help me make sure I don't. He gets very petulant with my loose categories. So
I'm sorry for my loose terminology here.
No, not you. He's going to beat me up later. So I'm just trying to paint a picture for you that there are ethnic Slavs, there are Slavic speakers. And so, because the reason is because civilizations matured at a different rate, and so you had the beginning down there in the Fertile Crescents, in Anatolia, and spread to the Fertile Crescents and the River Valley civilizations, both in Egypt, the Tigris-Euphrates, Levant, and uh, Indus River Valley and the Yellow River. You had these river valley civilizations all develop fairly quickly and early and build civilizations. You had the West as really you had the Mediterraneans lagging behind these, and then you had the West or Europe lagging behind, and then you had the northern and steppe people lagging further behind. And then you have the people of Siberia and the Americas are really far behind, and then the people most behind are the people down New Zealand, Australia, and the Southeast Pacific. I mean, so you have a lot of us. If you're in the Middle East, right? I mean, you're at the axis between the African pathway up next to the Red Sea, India, the steppes, Europe, and I mean, you've got that's the reason that area developed fastest is a pretty good climate back then, and with extraordinary trade routes. So information passed really quickly. So not only did you have these rivers and with providing transport and sustenance, but you also had the ability to irrigate using those rivers, and you got a certain rate of evolution out there, and really everything sort of radiates out of that in concentric circles over time. The problem is that they didn't invent horse chariot wheel bronze, right? They didn't put that to get combination together. Europeans did. So when when you get down to 3000 BC there somewhere between 3000 and 1500, there's an awful lot's happening in Anatolia in old Europe, which means the Balkans, Greece. In other words, everything around the Black Sea, something's going on. And so you get this expansion out of the Indo-European expansion out of the Yamna, who basically they invert the world. They stop us from being earth worshippers and bound to the earth and only able to move at foot speed. They invented maneuver warfare using basically high technology. And I mean, there was no stopping them. That's why they conquered everything between China and Spain.
Mm.
So I mean, it's very, very, very different universes there. Anyway, I have coffee, but I lost my train of thought there, so I forgot your question.
My original question was what caused Russia
Okay.
or the Orthodox civilization head down a path of, outright Russian, like trying to implement communism or discretionary rule, absolute.
Okay. So think of it as there's a radiation out of the Middle East, and that's from Persia to Byzantium down to Constantinople to the Bosporus, rather, that's probably the way. Persia to the Bosporus down to Egypt. And in that triangle, there's just a lot going on. And then you get the development of Europe and the spread of Christianity. But what happens to the Russians is really the Mongols, the Golden Horde.
Oh man! They got invaded. Russia as a history.
They really destroyed that part of the world, and so you mean Kiev was probably the easternmost center of Western civilization that was originally settled probably by Scandinavians who tried to bring to the poor. This is quite a poor area over there. Tried to bring trade there. And so, because that's the problem with being in Ukraine and Russia, is there are some rivers, but stuff's really far apart. And so it's really expensive territory to rule. And so what happened is the Vikings come down and they make their trade centers and whatever. But when the Golden Horde comes around and destroys Kiev, and literally destroys it, and then they set up the rule of the Golden Horde. This really creates an environment, a Mongol rule. It creates a Chinese, Eastern authoritarian rule by a minority population that extracts from a very poor majority, that hasn't had the chance to go through a commercial phase. So by the time, you get to the Mongols, a lot of Europe's gone through 2 commercial phases already. And that's where you get trust from, is a homogenous people and commerce. And once your customer base gets beyond your family, trust starts going beyond that. You need trust beyond your family and kin. And so what happened was, just as Eastern Europe is the borderlands, which is from basically where with the Dnieper, which is where Kiev is. It's on the Dnieper River. The Dnieper through to the Urals, that was held by the Mongols, and it had not had a chance to go through a commercial development phase. So you start out with this totalitarian rule. So what happens is that this is not a very good system of government. It's very hard to rule. They have the problem of the Mongols have the problem of being a minority. So what happens is Muscovy, the one of the more brutal kingdoms, is able to free itself from Mongol rule, and incrementally, with great brutality, with Europeans with Mongol levels of brutality, conquer the Golden Horde Empire. And so you have people who have been serfs or basic slaves under the Mongols, and then you have people who use Mongol techniques, Mongol strategy and ethics to take over some Russian historian is going to kill me for oversimplifying this, but they expand, and literally out of Muscovy, Moscow conquers everything from Siberia, actually Alaska for that matter, down to Crimea to the borders of Eastern Europe. They did a great job of freeing themselves. The problem and then they started going down the normal path, right? They're trying to the czars try to develop commercial society. They try to modernize, but they have what they call the boyars. And so think of German princes as being the optimum kind of ruler, French princes as being the not so optimum ruler, but pretty good. And then you have the boyars, who are like gangsters compared to rulers. Right, so they're extremely exploitative of their people, and so the czars or whatever, the leadership is trying to domesticate and modernize this, and unfortunately, the World War. We had Marxism develop, and then the World War and the Bolsheviks. And unfortunately, high Jewish participation in that part of the world at that time. That's where most of them were. And they were heavily instrumental in the Bolshevik Revolution and the purge against the ordinary and the punishment of the ordinary Russian people. Not that Russians are absolved from this. So they went through, an attempt at modernization, which took a while. They didn't get to go through our Enlightenment phases from Italy all the way up to Britain, and the kings. They had a large territory where their leadership tried to bring them up to European standards of living. And between Marxism, Bolsheviks, and the World Wars, we got Bolshevism. So these people go from being under Mongol rule to be under under boyar rule, basically, to being freed from serfdom, just recently in the 1800s, to all of a sudden, within a few years, being turned into Soviet serfs, right?
Yeah.
So, and your average Russian sees the world as, why is everybody so shitty to us? They have a big territory, and they actually feel like everybody's after them. So their view of the Second World War is that, well, we defeated the Nazis. Well, they're right. We defeated the Nazis. We lost millions of people. Yeah, Bolshevism was it was freaking horrible. We agree with you, but that's over. We're not those people anymore, and that's how they see the world. But from their perspective, they are just now, in the past, under Putin, really, even though under Putin, only the past whatever couple decades, they're just trying to build a diverse middle class, a diverse economy with a large enough middle class. Because that large, diverse economy with a large enough middle class is what produces a high trust polity. Well, and there's reasons the Westerns did it earlier, but I mean, among Russians, that's how it is. So they don't trust anybody. I mean, can you imagine what it's like to be a Russian? Russian tradition. Everybody's been trying to screw you.
Well, I'm black, so I'm kind of taught to be distrusting the white man, so I can understand their mentality a little bit.
So, I mean, I totally get. I actually love them. I mean, I love Russian people. Their low trust crap really bothers me, because you realize that they it's going to be 100 years before they can take that resource-based, resource curse economy that's 50% run by the government, and turn that into a diverse economy across 11 time zones with 140 million people. I mean, it's a really hard problem. And so I tend to look at Putin, I'm like, damn, that was pretty good. The guy did a good job there. His only screw up was Ukraine. If he had done that, he'd be the leading, he'd go back to be, because he was before that, he'd be the most influential, most copied leader in the world. So.
Yeah. Just that's really puts things in a lot of perspective, giving their suffering over their course of history. You kind of make me feel more sympathetic to the Russians than I already am. Like,
well, if you live with them, they're freaking wonderful. I mean, if friends in that part of the world, I mean, the example I got is I ran out of gas in eastern Ukraine, and my friends were angry with me that I didn't call them. Because what I was doing by going and do was, I was saying they don't take care of me. They're, you know what I mean? I mean, that they're not good friends. And you should have called me. I would have come over. And so this is what I love about them. The problem they have is that because they have this trust problem, and they have a speak truth to power problem, they don't like to do it. And there's still a little this boyar mentality, or this gangster mentality in the post-Soviet.
Remind me of black people, honestly.
I'm sorry, what?
No, it reminds me of black people or African American blacks. I'm just speaking out of my own experience.
No, the problem is, I don't know if I can answer that. I can even answer that question.
It's more of a statement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see. I get it. Well, it's for the same reason. We had Southern blacks were before the Great Society movement in '63. You saw these communities developing. What happened, though, is by this forcible integration, the middle class blacks defected to the whites, right? And so they left their body politic behind them without their own people their own people leadership to go, and it was happening. You could see it happen. I mean, you go back and you look at the data, and there's middle class and political blacks moving. There is trust among these. You think they're poor, but they're farmers. It was working out just fine. And white people and their fucking attitude of I'm going to do good so I can virtue signal mess that up. And they thought that they could do with blacks in America what the Russians did with Russians in Russia. The problem is that you're talking about the difference between a homogenous people and two different peoples. And so the problem for middle class blacks is, well, we'll just go integrate into white society and leave all our people behind. And that was a destructive effort. I don't like it. I'm still frustrated by it because you see these people and they're like, well, we went through we put black people through another half century of fucking nonsense because we interfered again. I mean, just leave people alone. They'll do fine.
Yeah, then you repeat a lot of Thomas Sowell's and Walter Williams talking points because, well, for one, it's true. Yep. It's a really interesting situation. It's a really interesting situation because black people really value family. They value the community. They value a lot of very strong virtues, but since those retroaggressions, since the war on poverty and great societies has really set them back, as you said, as Soul says, as Walter Williams says. I find that to be really disheartening when you look at the history, the real history of it. Anyway, back on civilizations. You want to talk about China?
Talk about whatever you want, man. You asked me on your show. I'm here to serve you.
All right. All right. Okay, pick your brain.
I'm doing my job. This is my job. I don't know how good I am at it, but I got to do my job.
Okay, I feel like Peter Robinson right now.
Peter Robinson.
The guy from Uncommon Knowledge, the interviewer. Like he interviews like people like Soul, Victor Davis Harris, people like him.
Yes.
Yeah, he works at the Hoover Institution.
I got it. I'm caught up.
Yeah. China. You said China. Well, I got Kissinger's on China with me right now. And their mentality.
Great book, by the way, it's a wonderful book.
Their mentality is very different from the West. Obviously, they don't share the same.
Nope.
They don't share the same heroism as the West when it comes to foreign policy. Yeah, they don't share. They don't share a lot of things in common with the West. But one thing to know is that they do share. They do share that they view themselves as Middle Kingdom, as they're already as a hegemon already. They're special. It's special in a sense. Can you explain why they feel this great pride in their world, in their how they view themselves in the world?
Sure. So they are on the edge of Eurasia, right? They have a sea on one end, right, and an uncrossable desert on the other, and the Arctic tundra to the north. And so, for all intents and China, if you look at it from a map, it's hard to understand that desert is the vast majority of the country, and that when you talk about China, it's a little strip of green along the coast, just like California is a little strip of green along the west coast of America. And so, to some degree, they have a bit of an island mentality, which is that, and they're not like, and if you look at that boundary, they only had basically animals all around them, other than the Japanese. or is if you look at the Middle East or Europe or any of the European subcultures, sub societies, um, we have been up against advanced competitors, not you know not Mongols. Um, and so they have this. They when they say Middle Kingdom, that is a dishonest. Um, they mean the center of the world, right?
Yeah.
They view themselves as the center of the world, and that they are the first and wisest and wealthiest and most successful. Well, they're also a little strip of, a lot of people in a little strip of green on the edge of the Eurasian continent with no competitors. They have to keep out the barbarians, which is why they built the wall. And to some degree, Europeans should have built the wall. I mean, the Romans finally figured out they built the wall. The problem is they would have had to build it across the Bosporus, and that would have cut off trade routes. So, Chinese had a different source. So they have this. And the second thing they have is they value harmony. And because their Civil War period, their equivalent of our world wars, was so terrifying that they built their whole country around, their whole empire really, around never doing that again. So they went for stability, harmony. They do the opposite of us, which is we speak truth to power. And they don't even know what truth is because they don't speak it to power, right? I mean, that's what they mean by face, is they mean don't speak truth to power. So if you took people like that and they have only primitive competitors, whenever they went out and explored the world, they found people less advanced than they were. And in their view, there was nothing to be learned from them. It's sort of, when people call them an anthill culture, that's about right. I mean, it's an anthill, and they love their little anthill, and they prefer that the world serves the anthill. We have a very different ethic in that Western people have. This is what I mean. We don't. As a black guy, you may not like this, but our view is our whole society is built on profiting from the domestication of less sophisticated people. That's what the Western civilization did.
Oh, by the way, I'm not offended by any means.
No. I mean, I just try to. I want to be not insensitive, but I look at it and I'm like, wow, we really did that. Oh yeah, shit, damn, we really did that. And so I'm kind of horrified by it myself because I'm part of the. I was also raised in this virtue signaling. This white man's burden, Western civilization. Virtue signaling bullshit of Christianity myself, so I have a little trouble resisting it on my own. But when I look back at it, I realize that that's what you do. The horse culture, they domesticated the horse, and that worked out well for them. And they went out and either eradicated or domesticated everybody else they could because it was profitable to rule.
Despite their Confucian, family-based tradition society, why are they such a low trust polity?
They would argue that they're not, and I've had this argument with them. But the problem is, they love each other, but when you say trust, I'm not sure they know what that means to us. It means you can risk capital, right? And you won't encounter production or cheating or lying or scheming. And that's just not true. And the reason is, again, that you in order to develop trust, you have to either start out with a militia or build a middle class. And in the Western civilization, we started out with a militia, manorialism, and the middle class, and the ability to climb the dominance hierarchy through demonstrated merit. I mean, no matter who you were. pretty much. And this is overstating it a bit, but it gets the idea across. And then in China, you don't do that. They're a family from the emperor on down, and you do what you're told, and
Mm.
you don't interrupt the dominance hierarchy, and you maintain harmony.
Mm.
What we do is just the opposite. You flip it around. So they're hardworking people by and large. They're dirty people, unfortunately. There's still quite a bit of a problem with that over there. They're not like the Japanese. They're hardworking people. They're pretty innovative and entrepreneurial, and over time they will build a middle class, fairly low GDP, per capita GDP, because it's just such a phenomenally poor country with such a phenomenally large population. It's really an empire. We tend to call China a country. That's like calling Western civilization a country. I mean, if you compare Western civilization, which is, I don't know, there's probably 750 million of us, right? To them, 1.3 or 4 or whatever billion of it is. They can't even count, right? They can't even tell how many of them there are. That's probably a more equal comparison. But they're really an empire. The Han are a very large percentage of the population, but they're still an empire. So they have this. They just have a very different concept of what's good. For us, good is heroism, because heroism provides innovation to the group, and the group can then better compete against other groups. But they don't have that because they're not surrounded by the Middle East. They're not surrounded by competing kingdoms and different languages and different. I mean, they're just not. And so they don't have this idea of this culture of innovation. They're getting there. They're going to. Whether they can get to the point where they don't run over 2-year-olds in the street and then pretend it didn't happen, or they're actually cognizant of each other well enough not to run each other over on a daily basis, or the government isn't so corrupt that the people generally suffer for it, or the fact that I mean, go through all that stuff. I think that's just time. I mean, it's just time. I mean, it's the same thing like taking care of your, respecting the commons and pollution are two similar problems. What happens is you have to be wealthy enough to be able to prefer that preference. And so that's why countries usually go through a pollution stage. And then once they have enough of a middle class that doesn't like it, they start paying for not having pollution. Well, it's the same thing for taking care of each other in the commons. When you're poor and desperate, you don't have excess resources to devote to things, including trust. And once you're wealthy enough, you start to. So I think they'll get there with time. Same way, I think all peoples will get there with time.
Yeah, yeah. You man, you said something about Japan, like a rather discouraging remark. What's wrong with the Japanese civilization? Because they're kind of are one in their own right.
Oh yeah, they are. If I said anything bad about Japanese, I didn't mean to. I don't have anything I mean, if you tell me there's 2 countries that do it right, it's Switzerland and Japan, and that's it. I mean, so I'm not going to say anything wrong about the Japanese. I think they ought to put the emperor back in place and give him veto power over some of this nonsense. But aside from that, I mean, putting the emperor back in place, or a king, so he can dismiss parliament for being a bunch of clowns. And if you ever watch TV of Japanese parliament, they can be clowns. I mean, I used to get a laugh out of Ukrainian parliament, but Japanese parliament's insane.
Is it worse than British parliament?
I love British parliament because it's a war of words, and that's where the British get their love for rhetoric, is the way they do things. So, I mean, it's a little childish and petty, and sometimes it borders on watching a stand-up comedy routine. And the British have, gone into virtual cycle decline. I know they've just gotten completely out of hand. But that said, the model the Americans use, where we use speeches, And the model the British use, where they use debates, I mean, it's pretty clear the British model is better. I mean, a lot of what they do there is, I mean, German's model is probably the best, but British model is pretty good.
That's that's an interesting take. Just yeah, I guess I need to I guess I need to explore a little bit more in the world, because I right now I think the American model, how they run things, it's pretty good.
Americans? No, Americans we have the privilege of being wealthy enough to be stupid in an ongoing basis, and that has coming to an end. I mean, we conquered a continent and sold it off a parcel at a time. And we made then what we didn't profit, and then we did an even better job of financing financing those things and profiting from financing it. I mean, it's the greatest scam in human history. We Americans have our own resource curse, and it's called the housing business, the housing industry. We pick. Australians ask me, well, we have all this resource wealth, and the resource is a curse, man. All it does is encourage corruption. Well, look at Russia; they got the resource curse. I mean, Russia's a gas station. They happen to be able to do a lot of good with it, but it's still a gas station. I mean, it's hard to be Belgium or Japan. You don't have any resources to continue, so you got to make stuff happen. So America has a resource curse. We just lie about it. We just pretend it doesn't exist, and that's that. The economy is so dependent on housing and the payment of interest on the housing and consumer debt, and the use of that interest to pay for institutional what do you call it? Payments, payments through dividends. So example, pensions. We have all this stuff paid through this debt cycle, but that we pretend that America is so innovative. Well, we're pretty innovative, but on the other hand, it's because we're wealthy, and we're wealthy because we've been selling off territory to immigrants and that's the only reason we're wealthy. I mean, people think about this, that what has China done to our economy by lowering the price of consumer goods? Well, they've made us consume more DVDs and CD players and electronics, but at the cost of losing a lot of core technology and jobs, or high-paying jobs in our own country. Well, we did that. People don't remember that we did that to Europe in the 1800s, and it caused the same collapse in the European economy after 1880 that we experienced here in the United States because of China and India coming online. So, America, we tend to have all this stuff, and the only really good thing about America is we have a high tolerance for legal conflict and a very much a common law system. So we can take a lot of risks, and we don't pay there are no constraints to us doing to anything unless we screw up. Whereas in the rest of the world, they use a lot of prior restraint, continental law, and a lot of regulation, so that you can't get into these debates in the first place. And I think the jury's out that we're right on that, and the rest of the world is wrong. I think the jury, that's an argument that's settled. I mean, we got this one thing right, but to say that we've got, or just flip it around, the Europeans have consumer protection right. I mean, this bullshit of the average American is preyed upon by telcos, cable companies. I mean, credit cards. The number of ways Americans are preyed upon is unbelievable and would never be tolerated in Europe. And so that's what they got right. And they probably got, a bunch of other certainly Germany got education right. We didn't. We got it wrong. So, there's things we all do, but to think that America we got a lot going on. I mean, having enough money to be stupid is a luxury.
Wealth can hide many sins.
Yep.
Okay, you just blackpilled me on America, so thank you.
Well, you gotta the these problems of these generalizations. It's like we were talking about Russia and China. I mean, you can find something good in every culture. You can find something bad in every culture. But most of the time, these myths that we tell ourselves, they're like religious inspiration. They don't. There's no substance behind them, and so I always think we make poor decisions because we believe this nonsense. Whereas it's all explainable. There's no, I don't think what I'm telling you is that difficult, right? I mean, it's not. An average guy can understand this. I know because plenty of average guys. Nobody understands my epistemological work or the grammars and that stuff. I mean, nobody understands. I mean, a few guys understand it, but I mean, the comparative civilization is is something everybody can understand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that we don't teach it is kind of criminal. It's like not teaching economics. We teach people poli-sci, almost all of which is or sociology, almost all of which is false. And we don't teach people how to balance a checkbook, the power of compound interest, micro, and the vagaries of macroeconomics. That's stuff that you shouldn't be able to get out of high school without knowing because it affects your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess America is forever lost in our stupidity. Well, I don't know. I still have hope for America till it wakes up and it's.
There is a whole lot of good in convincing your entire population that things will work out because they will take risks, and taking risks produces extraordinary benefits to a creature that evolved to be very cautious of taking risks. So there's some really good stuff we do here. I keep telling people if you're in the lower class, we're the wrong country to come to. If you're in the middle class, go to Canada. But if you're in the professional class and you want to make money, or you want to become a millionaire, if you're willing to work hard, you can do it here.
And that sounds like a true American right there.
Yeah, it's the third way, right? I mean, the Adams and Jefferson and the whole crew, they tried to create a third way. They said, well, we don't want to go the theological way. We don't want to go to the statist way. Let's go the middle class way. So they didn't take the bottom class way, religion. They didn't take the upper class way, aristocracy. They took the middle way, which was meritocratic middle class. And because the middle class was just becoming a force, and that was their experiment. The problem is that it's really good for you if you want to play that game. But I mean, if we start importing people from third worlds in large numbers or liberating women so that they can be single moms, that way won't work. It doesn't work because meritocracy isn't survivable for those people.
Exactly. Moreover, let's talk about a very special place, Germany. Over the course of this period in my life, I met a lot of people who have a very strong admiration for Germany specifically. Me personally, I have a more connection to the French for some reason, but what makes Germany so special in Europe anyway?
Germany's always been the heart of Europe. I mean, if you go back into prehistory, it's really Poland, Germany. We call it Prussia. That's the heart of that's where ethnically Western people evolved. I think that what's lost is that Germany was the poorer part of Europe for a long time, and Germans understood that they could specialize in craftsmanship, and they developed craftsmanship. And by the time you get to Frederick the Great, who wants to bring the German princedoms into modernity, he invents Prussianism, which is really just an extension of the militia. It's the restoring the militia formally, and he created what Germans needed to follow. And so I think that Um, uh, Germans think like engineers, and they still practice the craftsman engineering is very core to them. They still practice culturally the ancient European Germanic oath, which is tell the truth, work hard, and and tell the truth, and don't steal, and do your duty. And they also have a sense of piety, which is hard to get across. My friend Aaron Carolyn tries to help me understand this, but they have a sense of not only duty but piety, which is that these truth, um, uh, duty, and uh, they're sacred. They're still sacred. Truth, honesty, morality, and duty are sacred, and they have this whole thing of do the right thing as a tribe. Now, um, and so the other way, so that's one venue. In other words, that's the cultural values of it. If we look at it as in other words, they started out as farmers. They went deliberately to craftsmen. They had small states. They unified under what you would think of as the Prussian strategy, and they were bringing about the second scientific revolution, or what I tend, and that's what happened in the 1800s. That's why America benefited in the war, is that we basically inherited the results of the German scientific revolution. If you look at it the other way and put it in historical perspective, usually you need if we go back to Athens, Athens and Sparta, you have Athens as a naval power intended to be excessively liberal, and you had Sparta as a army, military power, and they tended to be excessively conservative. And you come forward into modernity, and you say that London or England was a naval power, somewhat so Belgium, Holland, and France, um, and that Germany was Sparta, a military power. You can see that this conflict and the benefits of having both of those specialties in the past in the Aegean, and have the benefits of having them around the North Sea, Baltic, and Atlantic, with England and Germany, that worked the same way, resulting in the same conflict. So my reason for giving you the first set of examples and the second is that specializing in, like the Romans did, in engineering, in craftsmanship, in military discipline, and creating a military order is extremely successful group strategy. It's the most successful group strategy. The problem is that you're usually in competition with a naval power who can generate more wealth than you can, and who tends to be extraordinarily liberal and tend to spread bad behavior by its excessive liberalism. This is what you get in America, United States, Canada, and Britain, is we have too much liberalism.
Do you think the Anglos really set them back? Like Germany's progress.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was the greatest mistake in history. It was the greatest mistake since the War of Sparta and Athens, or it was catastrophic. Maybe or maybe the only mistake that compares is Rome's expansion into the Levant. I mean, when they should have maintained maintain themselves as a European power, because the minute you had to become running a naval Roman Empire across the Mediterranean is cheap, but running an army, the military landed power, is really expensive. So once they switched from having to have ships to garrison, ships and marines, our legions, to switching to having to have to hold all that territory, they couldn't afford it. So I don't. Sorry, I'm feeling like I'm speaking very freely, and I'm worried that I'm overloading your audience.
You're doing fine. A lot of people who watch this later will understand you perfectly.
I had a guy from yesterday, and he's like, "Well, you know, I can only tolerate Doolittle for 5 minutes." Well, I mean, dude, you know, I mean, you're my wrong audience. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just you're well. Once I understand what you're saying, just like this just I feel stupid for not understanding before.
I put a lot of people have no idea. I mean, I have the gift of being able to absorb extraordinary amounts of information, and I'm a pretty old guy, right? I'm in my 50s. And so, I mean, I've consumed a lot of fucking information, and I've done a lot of shit in my life. So, I mean, I've had a lot of time to build this up, and then for the past, 10 years, I've been trying to work on this full time. So you imagine, I mean, it's not. I always say it's not like I'm that smart. I just spent a lot of time on this problem. Anyway.
Just on just Germany, the heart of. I've been kind of taught that United Kingdom, or at least England, was sort of like the heart of Europe, since it was sort of like the birthplace of liberalism. Well, at least I was sort of taught.
No, that's the wrong way to look at it. Um, England was the birthplace of empiricism. In other words, English law was Anglo-Saxon, right? It was brought over. Anglo-Saxon law is preserved Germanic law, which is tell the truth, don't steal stuff, do your duty, right? So this kind of truth telling and then dependence on the militia spread that everywhere, because when you're in the military, they teach you to report. If you've been in the military, but reporting is like testifying in court. You don't give your opinion, you state the facts. It's actually pretty hard to teach people to report. So that's why the military works so hard to indoctrinate you into using certain kinds of speech so that you're only reporting, you're not opining. So we had that law existed, and when Bacon comes around, he applies that kind of argument from the law to the sciences. And that's where empiricism sort of comes from. There's a lot more to it than that. There's Galileo and whatever, but argumentatively, that's where it comes from. And then, for various reasons, England starts the Industrial Revolution, and there's some very good reasons for that, including the way the society was organized. I mean, it was easier to move people to capital, concentrated capital, etc. But whatever, they start the Industrial Revolution, and so everybody reacts to that. But that's but the cultural core of Europe is martial farmers, and that's Germany. And in fact, there were a number of agreements in history through the Catholic states that not to interfere with Germany, because Germany was the means by which the periphery, in other words, the Catholic states, were insulated from the barbarians. And so Germany's been martial for a very long time, and you don't want to. But at the time of the American Revolution, they're the last people on earth you want to mess with is the Germans. I think today Russians have taken over that sort of proposition, but they're not as disciplined as the Germans are. I mean, German culture, like Japanese culture, is something very unique and very special. And hopefully we can give Germans their confidence back before they continue down this path of Soviet Merkel suicide.
Yeah, man, multiculturalism is such a wonderful success in Europe, man.
Disaster.
Yeah, that just
goes on after the other.
I just being sarcastic. I remember on that point, I remember this lecture that Hans Hermann Hoppe gave about coming to age with Murray, and he did mention that in the official German history, in the official he was basically taught to hate being German in his culture. Then Murray helped sort of just helped giving his confidence back. You know, um,
Yes, yes. Oh, I can see that. People don't realize that was how important that was for Hop. I think um, that that understanding that the princedoms were really the optimum form of social order, and I think once Hop understood that, it gave him his confidence. I mean, he says that, right? I mean,
yeah,
and so I agree with it. And I've come to. I mean, I agree with Hop on an awful lot of stuff other than his method of argument. I just, that whole Kantian Marxist bullshit just makes me nuts. But I mean, other than that, his argument, his understanding of history is exceptional.
yeah, yeah. It really is. Like, despite Rothbar's rather negative influence on him, just he really brought out the best of what Rothbar set forward in his liberty.
I think he fixed Rothbard.
He really did.
Yeah, to me, it's like Mises comes along, and boy, that's a little bit of a mess there. But Rothbard tries to work with it, and he makes up a mess. Hop comes along, and he's like, "Wait a minute, I can Germanicize this Jewish borderland. This what do you call what do they call the? I can take this Jewish separatist borderland thing and turn it into a recipe for restoring German princedoms." I tell everybody all I did was convert Hobbes' Kantian and Marxist rationalism, which is a justificationary method of reasoning, into scientific language, and then I built on it. So to try to explain that to most people, that's too difficult. But that's why I say I learned the guy I learned the most from was Hop. Because he got to a logical law of social science.
I love this. Honestly, I will pay money to see you two talk someday, but I think
he's still mad at me because I was rude to Rothbard. It's like when I first figured out I'd solved the problem, my contact was, says, dude, I know this is nuts, but I figured it out. I figured out the problem. And and I mean, like, I don't think I'm an American entrepreneur, and I'm not, I don't have a Germanic sense of hierarchy. In other words, I treat everybody as my peer, and I don't have any respect for hierarchy authority. It's just not how I'm wired. And so, for a variety of reasons, he was whatever. He did give me incredible advice, which I took to heart, which was um, uh, to use as many existing terms as possible and to redefine them instead of doing what most other people do, which is invent terms. And so I went back and I rebuilt my glossary, and that's where I get all this terminology from. Is I rebuilt my glossary on very specific definitions of terms, and that's because of him. But he was not happy with he wrote me. He was not happy with being disrespectful to great men of great achievement, and that I ought to be more humble. And he's probably right. Though my problem was at that particular point, once I'd realized that Rothbard, the Marxists, the neocons were just playing the same game, pill pull, using the same strategy, I was pretty angry. And it took me a couple of years to get over it, being angry about it. And so I'm not so angry about it anymore. And even with the whole invention of this form of deception in Abrahamism, Jewish people, Abrahamic religions, and the spread of that into Western philosophy. Even though I think that's one of the most horrible things that ever happened. My anger has sort of dissipated with age, and so I just see it as a problem that needs to be solved. But he was right to give me a kick in the ass there.
Yeah. That's a really great quote. by Hans, what you just said before. Um, you should be more humble. You disrespected you disrespected great men of great achievement. You should be more humble. I need to remember that.
Well, again, I the degree to which I think about truth in the scientific sense is pretty uncommon, and unfortunately, it's pretty unforgiving. So, I don't let myself. The way I think about things is I don't let myself emotionally evaluate them until I've solved the problem, and then I go back and emotionally evaluate it. Because I find that that's what most people do is they color an intermediary step, which prevents them from getting to the root cause, the first principles, and so it's just how
Yeah.
it does it. But I've gotten more forgiving.
Yeah. Will you ever, I don't know, like despite of Rothbard's mistakes, will you ever forgive him um
Hard.
for
It's like do
creating this mess?
it. uh, um, that's a really smart question. I don't think anybody's asked me anything that deep in a long time, and I might have to think about that. Will I? I have a hard time forgiving the whole chain of people from Zoroaster on down. And I don't think I could forgive a Marx or a Rothbard or a Freud any more than I could forgive a Saul, or I don't think I could do that because I view it up there with the great evils of history. So why would I? What does forgive mean? Does that mean I? No, because forgive would mean that I wouldn't, that I would top. To me, I would say that above all, that we should make sure that that never happens again. And so that is the single thing we've got to prevent from happening again is another Abrahamic, Kantian, uh, Ashkenazi, postmodern set of deceptions, because these things are cancers to human. I mean, they're as bad as the Great Plagues. I mean, they're horrible. I mean,
Oh,
these are. I mean, how many people have died from Islam? 750 million. I mean, how many people died from Marxism alone? We lost 100 million people, and we've set back humanity how far? The Greeks were, Archimedes was very close to the Industrial Revolution, and the Romans, had they been able to recover, might have brought it about. So we lost it. And so the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims together brought about 1,000-year dark age of suffering and death. Why didn't we go right from Greco-Roman civilization to the Industrial Revolution? So you want to say, I'm going to forgive these people? I don't feel very forgiving. It seems like if it's the last thing on earth I should forgive.
I don't know. As a Christian, um, I still respect Rothbard because he did bring out some half truths into discussions, but I cannot. But I have to reject everything that he brought along his ethical system, because I really do think, and I do thank you for this, for pointing this out, that Rothbard did destroy a respectable libertarian movement, or just libertarianism. Um, as you said, you killed anarcho-capitalism, and it will stay dead or ever. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I mean, there's always going to. I mean, there's a market for idiots, right? I mean, there's always going to be a Marxist and a Rothbardian around. I mean, if you look at Rothbard in the sense that I just stated it, which is, if you look at Marxism, uh, Misesianism, Rothbardianism, then Hoppe gets a hold of it, and he does the best he can with the way he was taught, which is Kantian rationalism, and he was taught by Marxists. And so he did the best he could. Well, I came up in a different world. I'm raised entirely under the sciences, and I'm raised under the Anglo philosophy and Anglo system of common law. I mean, Anglo philosophy is really just an extension of law. So, the way I just inherited my ancestors' way, the way Hop inherited his ancestors' way, the way that Rothbard and Mises inherited their ancestors' way of thinking. And this is the problem with these different grammars and ways of argument. And so, but to me, you look at it, Rothbard put his arms around a problem. He tried to create um, a, a logic of cooperation. Hop took it and he really did bridge the gap between law and logic. What I did is that I just took his Kantian and Marxist justificationism, which your people might have to go look that up on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and understand the difference between rational justificationism and scientific falsificationism. It's a very big difference. And I restated what he stated in science, and I took it from there. And so, if you look at Rothbard in that chain, then the heroic thing to draw from it is we solved social science in 3 generations. Now that is fucking cool. And if you want to say that Rothbard did the best he could, Hop did the best he could, and I did the best he could, and together we solved social science in 3 generations, and nobody else did, despite us being on the freaking fringe of everything, then, I'm sorry, I think that's a pretty heroic way to position it. If you're going to isolate Rothbard as himself and isolate Hop as himself or me as myself, I don't think that's I think you have to criticize each individual. But if you look at the movement of anarcho-capitalism as a research program, an intellectual research program into the development of a rigid construction of natural law based on what they called property, what I would call non-imposition, you would say, shit, we did what nobody else did. I mean, it's freaking outrageous. So, from that perspective, if you want to say, did he bring something to the table? Did Hop bring something to the table? Then we all brought what we had to the table, and I think we solved it in 3 generations, and that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, I wonder where Hayek's fit into this anyway.
Hayek is where most people look at Rothbard, I look at Hayek, and where Hayek fits is there are 2, besides Einstein, there are really 2 or 3 papers. They're not even books that really matter in the 20th century. There's Einstein's paper on relativity. There's what's his name? Computer science. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Anyway, the Turing's paper. Sorry, it's what is it? 740? Yeah, I'm getting tired. It's 740. So we had Turing's paper on computation, the Turing machines. We had what's the guy? Wow, you see, if I'm forgetting names, it means I'm tired. The really left-wing Jewish guy that does grammars, Chomsky. Chomsky does Chomsky's grammars, and Hayek's presentation on economics before the Nobel Committee. If you see those 4 papers, aside from Einstein's, that's the revolution. And I think the way I look at it is Hayek started with his first work is actually on cognition, on the brain, and he gets very close. So Hayek was too early, and compared to Turing. So Turing comes along, and if if those 2 guys had been reversed, Hayek would have been able, like Chomsky was, to rely on Turing's model instead, and I think Hayek would have got to where I got. The problem is that order didn't happen. So I'm sitting here as the guy who's at the end of that chain of events, which is relativity. Information is the problem of the social sciences and the problem of commission. Maybe Popper's falsification in there. Turing's computability, and Chomsky's grammar. And if you look across those, you can say, well, what I have the privilege of being the guy in line behind them. And so where Hop doesn't have, or Rothbard have none of those. They weren't taught the same stuff I was taught. And so I learned through this very scientific rather than this historical, rationalistic Marxist nonsense. And so through those two chains, you can see that I'm just the beneficiary of those two axes of scholarship. To me, the person I associate with, like most people associate, my kindred spirit is Hayek, and I probably, when I read him, I hear myself talking. I mean, I wish that's way too gracious to myself. What I mean is, his frame of reference is very similar to how I look at the world. And unfortunately, Hayek starts out with what we would call psychology today, and he does an amazing job of working through psychology, economics, and law. And I have the differences that I've gone through the artificial intelligence revolution, so I have computability. So I don't start with psychology. I start with computability and go through economics and law. And so I have the benefit that Hop and Rothbard don't have.
Honestly, I kind of just view Hop as your Mises of sorts, and you just sort of just like, Hayek, just I always have that type. I always just view your relationship between Hop is similar to Mises and Hayek.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I probably, I heard Hop the first time at Mises Institute, and I remember it really clearly. And I'm like, God damn it, there's something wrong in there, but he's got it. And that was in 90, might have been 98 or 99 or 2000, somewhere in there. And I knew he had the problem. I've been working on the problem since about 92. And when I heard him, I'm like, holy crap, the freaking guy's got it. Can I do this? And so I remember telling Walter Block, I said, the problem is you guys are mistaking the Mises-Hayek relationship, and they're just two ends of the same spectrum. Hayek's working from the top down, and Mises is working from the bottom up. But I mean, you're creating a different distinction that doesn't have any difference when Hayek's basically right. I mean, what they were trying to do is preserve. The Mises Institute has been failing, and it will fail over time if it hasn't gotten itself into financial enough problems already. It will fail because it's too dedicated to the memory of Rothbard and his ethics of property, which is ghetto ethics, which is totally intolerable by the Christian and Protestant population. And so it's just wrong. Hop tries to correct this, but he does it with intersubjectively variable, viable property, and he does it with argumentation ethics. And that's all just a bunch of excuses to me. The end result is, why don't I kill you and take your stuff? Why don't me and mine kill you and yours and take your stuff? That's the beginning of negotiation, not argumentation. And so I start with violence, the assumption of violence, and Hobbes starts with the assumption of cooperation. And once you make there's a change from his sort of binary logic to my ternary, you end up with that you have to use violence to create a social order, and you have to create a social order that can survive competition from other social orders. You can't create an ideal, isolated social order. And once you understand that the Rothbardian, Hoppian world it doesn't exist because it can't. And the only way to create a libertarian order is rule of law, not with ghetto ethics, but with sovereignty ethics, ethics of sovereignty. In other words, non-imposition. Then you understand why none of those societies exist.
Yes, exactly. You're totally correct about that. I think I'm gonna end this here.
Before I ever talk your audience to sleep.
Yeah, we've been streaming for an hour, and you said you're getting tired anyway. So yeah.
When I start forgetting my nouns, I know oh, dudes, I gotta shut up soon.
I really hope you enjoy this talk of ours, and I hope you can come back to my channel.
Whenever you
Uh,
want, man. It's my job. I don't ask for interviews. I have enough to do, but if I get a smart guy to talk to, I don't refuse them either. And you're a smart guy, so thank you.
okay, I hope everybody has a good Memorial Day weekend in the United States, and good night.